and welcome to the Astranti pre-scene analysis video for the management case study exam for February 2016 on the company Pizzatime. So before we begin, I'm just going to start by telling you a little bit about myself and a bit about how we are going to approach the pre-scene and the things we're going to be looking for. So my name is Peter Steffer. I am the director of CIMA here at Astranti. I've been with the company since 2013, and during that time I've written and marked many of the mock exams that we provide, and I've also written mocks for other tuition providers. I've also written many of the study texts that you may have used. And if you see in the bottom left hand corner there, my Facebook page, on the run up to the exam I'll be posting all kinds of hints and tips. So now let's take a look at the video series themselves. So for starters, I'm going to go through the pre-scene section by section, picking up on all the key points, the things that you should be looking for, the things you should be pulling out of the text and analysing. I'll then be applying them to the case itself, what they mean for the company and what it means for the industry that it operates in. Applying certain business models to it, ones that you may have learnt in your objective test studies, and the likely exam issues. So looking at it and thinking, based on this information, a likely question is X. And also other just hints and tips, general things that will help you gain extra marks in the exam. I'll then go on to my strategic analysis video, which will be taking the pre-scene as a whole and summarising it and applying it into lots of different key business models and key business theories before rounding up with my top 10 issues. So these are the most likely things I think are going to come up in the actual exam. So how's it going to work? As I said, I'm going to go through it section by section. I'm going to assume that you haven't read the pre-scene. I'm going to assume that this is all new to you and we are going through it together for the first time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to make notes yourself. So I'll stop the videos at the start of each one and ask you to make notes on a certain number of pages, and then we'll go back and review it together. And as I've said, at the end we'll go through a full strategic analysis and top 10 issues. So first of all, some key things that you should be aware of. Now the pre-scene is the context of the exam. It's the context of the company that is being examined. The background information, as it were. So once you've read the pre-scene, this should all be forming a foundation in your mind, and when you go into the actual exam, all the unseen questions that come up in the actual exam, you should be answering them based on this base context from the pre-scene. But it's worth noting that you shouldn't write anything based on the pre-scene. That's because you're not necessarily going to be tested on something that's in the pre-scene. You'll be tested on the unseen material that you are given in the exam. If that unseen material is nothing to do with the material in the pre-scene, then you shouldn't be using the pre-scene material to answer the question. You must always use the unseen material. Having said that, you should always be thinking about the pre-scene material. Now, you're given this in advance for a reason. You're supposed to learn it and you're supposed to gain as much understanding as you can about the company so that you can use this information in the actual exam. So let's move on to the pre-scene now. Now, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is read through these first 3 pages here, so to the end of this section on business model, and make some notes and join me back at the top and we'll go through it together. Now the first page here is all about job description, so where you as the student sit in this exam, where you fit in to this organisation. Now a lot of people will initially just read through this and assume they already know what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to just answer the questions basically, and they won't take notice of it. But if we actually analyse this section here, there's a lot of information we can pick up. So first of all, we are based at the head office, the corporate office. So we know, regardless of what we find out about the structure of the organisation, that we sit in the corporate office, in the big central office of the organisation. We also see here that we report to the finance director. So this gives you an idea about the kind of things that you will be asked to do. You'll be asked to do work on behalf of the financial director so that they can then make financial decisions for the organization as a whole. So a lot of the work that you'll be doing might be compiling information and coming to a reasonable decision about what this means for the company so that you can then report back to the finance director, who in turn will take that information to the board. So you can see here that we're starting to bring in a more strategic aspect to the work that you are doing, and this of course you will build on this as you go through your strategic exams next time round. The next paragraph then goes on to speak more specifically about the kind of work that you do for the company. So you've got things here such as preparing the group budget. So this is the group budget for the organization as a whole, which of course will be broken down into the various regional components of the organization as well. So instantly there you're thinking about the different kinds of issues and the different kind of work that goes into preparing budgets, such as things like preparing the master budget, and all the different types of budgets, so activity-based budgeting, incremental budgeting, zero-based budgeting, and of course beyond budgeting performance measurement systems. So we're already starting to gain a picture of the kind of things that you might be asked to do in the exam. You're also in charge of making sure that the regional managers also adhere to these budgets. So of course that brings in aspects of group financial structures and how the various costs and revenues and variances, etc., how they are recorded up from the independent restaurants to the regional offices, up again to the corporate office. So there's a lot of group financing issues, group financing structures, things that you would have learned about in your F2 studies recently that could come up here. And then the final paragraph talks about the various things that you do for and with the finance director, such as drawing up costs. So this of course feeds back into what we were talking about with budgeting, but also could mean that there are issues with costing. As a management accountant, it's your responsibility to come up with a fair cost that can be covered so that the company can remain profitable. It may be to do with which costing systems you use in your financial accounts, so whether you use activity-based costing or absorption costing, and which one is the best for the organization and which one gives the truest cost of the operations in which the business performs. And also your role involves advising on pricing for impromptu projects. So there's two issues here. We've got pricing and projects. So two very important things both at P2 and E2. So something that you should know about, but whereas in your E2 and P2 exams you probably learnt about them on a very theoretical basis, there's an opportunity here for the CIMA examiner to test you on your ability to apply them to a more real-life situation. So let's take a look at pricing and projects respectively now. Now pricing is obviously a key aspect of any business, a key decision that a business needs to make. It needs to ensure that all its costs are covered, but also that it's making enough profit, that the price is the right for that particular product in the eyes of the consumer as well. If you're charging the price too cheaply, people may think it's a cheap alternative to more expensive options, but if you charge it too high, then you may lose sales from that. And as a management accountant, it's part of your responsibility to ensure that the right price is chosen that maximizes the profit for the organization, which of course is when the marginal cost and the marginal revenue are equal. So with that in mind, what kind of pricing strategies could we use here at Pizzatime? Well, I'll just go through a few with you now. They could, for example, put in a strategy of premium pricing. So this is of course the use of a very high price to show the consumer that it's a high quality product, a better product, and something that perhaps differentiates it from competitors. Of course, I'm sure you can see some issues with this insofar as All we know at the moment is that Pizzatime is a pizza company. Now, pizza is a very type of commodity of a product, and therefore it's very hard to differentiate purely on quality. At the end of the day, there's no really rare ingredients going into it. It's all very standardized. It's just a dough based with tomato and cheese and various toppings on top. So it's very hard to differentiate on quality here. And when it's hard to differentiate on quality, quite often what companies do is they try to beat competitors on pricing. So there's various pricing strategies you can use if your overall strategy is to beat competitors on price. There's things such as penetration pricing, which is all about charging a very low price, initially at least, to get a market share. Now, this is obviously more useful for newer companies starting out than perhaps more established ones. We don't know how long Pizzatime has been around for at the moment, so we couldn't say whether or not that would be an advisory pricing strategy. The next one, of course, is your low cost, your economy pricing. So this is where you just charge a very basic low price for a very basic product. And the reason behind that is, if you're a pizza restaurant, perhaps people just want to come in and have a slice of pizza, and they don't necessarily need all the frills that come along with other restaurants. Now, an example of this would be in airline industries. So your Ryanairs and your EasyJets are very low cost, economy priced products where they charge a very cheap price, and as a result they get many customers who don't want all the extra things that come along with flying. That perhaps could be good for an organization such as Pizzatime that deals in a highly commoditized product, a highly commoditized industry. Now, another pricing strategy that's important particularly for management accounts, is cost plus pricing. So this is where you take a look at all your costs and you put a percentage markup based on that, so that your costs are always covered and you're always getting a small profit margin. And the problem with cost plus pricing is it doesn't really take into account the consumers and the marketplace as a whole. It's a very internally focused pricing method. Now, when you think of pizza restaurants, or you think of restaurants in general and fast food places, another strategy that could be relevant is things like optional product pricing and bundle pricing. If you go on to, say, Domino's website, they have the pizzas on there, and they also have side orders such as chicken wings and potato wedges, etc. But they also have lots of deals where you get the pizza and the potato wedges and the chicken wings for a price that is cheaper than buying each bit separately, all with the goal of getting people to buy that more expensive bundle deal rather than just purchasing the individual products. So now let's move on to projects. Now, obviously project is a huge part of E2 and therefore is likely to be an important part of the management case study exam. So first of all, let's start by defining what a project is, for those of you who haven't studied E2 recently. Well, a project is defined as a one-off event, so something that is being done outside of the day-to-day works of the organization. It's being done with a clear objective, with a set timescale. Now, so an example of this could be that Pizzatime has been asked by a major supermarket retailer to provide a frozen pizza range for their supermarket, and they need 3 different types of pizza, and they need it within the next 3 months. So that's a clear objective for a set timescale, and it's also a one-off event because it's not part of the usual day-to-day operations of Pizzatime. A project also needs someone to run it who is responsible for the success or the failure of the project and for managing all of those people assigned to the project. So this could be either you as the assistant to the financial director or the financial director themselves. And it also needs to have relevant resources and budgets allocated to this. So this again feeds back into your role as a budget creator within the organization. And finally, what separates a project from regular day-to-day work is there's an end customer in mind for this, someone who we are doing this project for, rather than just part of our usual day-to-day operations. So one theory that might be very important to use here is the 9 areas of project management outlined by the Project Management Institute. So let's take a look at what these are and explain how they could be relevant to Pizzatime and your role as perhaps a project manager within the organization. So I've written out the 9 areas here. So let's take a look at what each of those means. So first of all, we have scope. Now the scope is the overall planning of the project as such. So what is to be achieved by this project. This is where your effective planning and controlling of objectives of the project comes in. Then of course you have time, which is very self-explanatory. Basically, when does it all have to be done by? When does each part of the project need to be done by? And you can use things such as critical path analysis and Gantt charts here to help you to measure the time and measure your progress as the project carries on. Next you have cost, which of course feeds back into budget setting. How much is the project going to cost? How much is each component of the project going to cost? And if it goes above a certain cost, does it no longer become profitable to continue with the project, etc.? And also a budget for it needs to be realistic. Are we going to effectively be able to complete this project with that the costs and the resources allocated? Which again feeds into quality, which is the next step here, which is all about what level of quality the project needs to be completed to. Does the project need to have a completely 100% perfect product or service at the end of it, or can it be done to a lesser quality? Now that may seem like an odd thing to say, because of course you'd always want the best quality, but there is always a trade-off between cost and quality and time. Now, is it worth putting in an extra week to get something twice as good? Possibly, if the cost is reasonable. Is it worth putting in twice the effort to get something from 99% complete to 100% complete? Possibly not. That's the trade-off between quality, cost, and time. And next is resources, or more to do with the management of resources here. So if, for example, this project needs use of a certain machine, certain computer systems, etc., are those resources available at the right times for that project? Because they may be utilized in doing day-to-day work for the rest of the time, but it needs to be clear that those resources are going to be available for the project. And procurement as well is all about getting the right supply. So if you need to bring in certain external contractors or raw materials for the project, have you got a good procurement system in place to ensure that those resources are being brought into the organization in time for use in the project? And of course, integration is all about good management of a project. It's all about bringing everything together and ensuring it all runs smoothly, which again ties into communication. There needs to be good communication between all parties, so the people who you are doing the project for need to be kept updated on the progress of it, and they may in turn have extra requirements they are feeding back to you. The project manager needs to know what all the members of the project team are doing, and the project team need to know that the manager knows what they are doing, that they are on track, and that they know exactly what the project manager wants. And finally, risk. Risk is a general thing that feeds into everything an organization does. Risk in terms of project management is all about identifying and quantifying the risks of the project, usually in the planning stage. What potential roadblocks could come up during this project's execution, and how are we going to deal with those things should they come up? So as you can see, just from this first page with just a few paragraphs on it, there's actually a wealth of information we can read as to your expected position within the organization and the kinds of questions that may come up in the unseen exams and the kind of theories that you can use to answer those questions. So let's move on to the second page now, which is all about the company itself and the company background. So this section gives us a bit of information about the business as a whole and a bit about the background and the history of the organization. So the first thing we can see is they operate a chain of pizza restaurants. So actual restaurants by definition, where people come in, sit down, order a meal and eat it there, rather than perhaps a takeaway restaurant such as Domino's. And we can see they're quite a substantial company. They have 970 restaurants, so a big player within the industry, of which 900 are located in Ireland, their home country. So they have quite a clear, quite a large presence within Ireland. Obviously at the moment we don't know how big Ireland is, we don't know how big the pizza restaurant industry is within Ireland. If it's an enormous country where there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pizza restaurants, then perhaps that's not so big. But if it is perhaps a smaller country with only a few thousand restaurants, then by having 900 they're quite a major player. So potentially they are a market leader or a big player within the pizza restaurant industry. They also have 69 restaurants in Peeland and a single one in Sealand. So very small presence in Sealand and a small-ish presence in Peeland. So this could be that there isn't the demand for pizza restaurants within these countries, or it could be that they are smaller nations as a whole, or less affluent nations where people aren't going out and spending money in pizza restaurants, or it could just be that these are very much new developments and that they are only just beginning to build their brand within these countries. Now, the company was founded in 1969 by two brothers. Now, the interesting thing about this is this follows very much the story of Pizza Hut's founding. So you may find it useful to look at the history and the operations of Pizza Hut when you are doing your analysis of the pre-scene analysis of the company. And they started off with very humble beginnings of a single restaurant in Ireland, hiring a premises on a short-term let. But the restaurant was an instant success. So what we can read from that is perhaps it's a very fast-growing industry, a very fast-growing company, which, although that may sound great, there are lots of risks and issues that come from a company when it is growing very quickly. Often these relate to funding and cash flow issues, because the company has to invest heavily to continue growing at the rate that the demand is increasing, but often they're perhaps not consolidating their position at the same time. So often you end up spending more than you are making. You're not seeing your returns quickly enough to keep up with the growth demands of the company. They then continued to build on this success by purchasing another restaurant, an existing pizza restaurant, and rebranding it as Pizzatime. Now this seems like a smart thing to do because you're in a sense buying that ready-made organization. It's already a restaurant, it's already perhaps got a customer base, it's already got all the relevant equipment, particularly as it's a pizza restaurant. So there are some advantages to buying another restaurant outright. However, as the company continues to grow, this could be an issue, as of course they may use different equipment in this particular restaurant. And as the company grows, it will want to standardize its processes, standardize its operations across the board. So sometimes it's not always the best thing to do to buy an existing restaurant because of this issue. There's also perhaps an issue with the initial cash outlay of purchasing a new restaurant. It could be very expensive, whereas if you're leasing, then you are covering the cost over a period of time. Another thing is if you are purchasing a failing restaurant, one that still operates but it's just failing at the time, you have the issue with the staff who already work at the company. Now, it's difficult to just lay them off straight away, so you have to perhaps retrain them to the Pizzatime way of thinking. So you may have a different culture to comprehend with in that restaurant than what you want in Pizzatime. They may also have different skills that they need to, the skills that they have may not be relevant to Pizzatime's operations, so they have to be retrained. So there's also a human resources issue here when relating to staff when purchasing a new restaurant. And as you can see, they've continued to do this. This is one of the other ways in which they have continued to grow, but alternatively they've also been leasing new premises and franchising. Now, the problem with leasing new premises is there are always risks involved around leasing. Obviously, it's cheaper than buying the premises outright, and it's less risky in the sense that you will not be tied up with that asset should you need to get rid of it. But the flip side of that, of course, is that the freeholder may turn around and say they're not going to renew the lease, at which point all the capital, all the investment that you've put into building up this restaurant in this area is all going to disappear overnight because you no longer have the right to operate within that premises. So leases can be a risk in that sense. But a lease will often form part of a medium to long-term plan. Usually a lease will be for about 10 years, possibly even more. So once you have leased that premises, you have a medium to long-term use of it. And of course, with franchising, there is always a risk of damage to your brand. Now, for those of you who don't know what franchising is when you sell the rights to your organization to an independent party to then basically operate a restaurant under the Pizzatime name, but it's not actually a Pizzatime company as such. And so the issue with that is, will this independent proprietor stick with the rules of the Pizzatime operations? Will they use the right quality ingredients? Will they use the right slogans, the right logos, everything to do with Pizzatime? When the consumer sees this franchised restaurant, they will not see it as a franchise restaurant, they will see it as a Pizzatime restaurant. And so anything that a franchisee does to their restaurant will have an impact on the Pizzatime brand itself. So that is always the risk when it comes to franchising. So an effective setup has to be in place to ensure that franchised companies are in keeping with the operations of Pizzatime. On the other hand, though, franchising is a great way to expand the company quickly, because you sit back, take in some income from the companies that you franchised out to, and you don't have to put all the effort into setting up and running the restaurant yourself. And then finally here it talks about its presence in Ireland and Peeland. Obviously we knew it was quite established in Ireland, but it's also established in Peeland. And they have now begun to explore the possibility of expanding more into Sealand. Obviously they have the one restaurant at the moment, but there is perhaps a market development opportunity here in Sealand to really grow the business. And as we can see, it's different markets in a different part of the world, and it says here it's quite different. So what it could mean by that is the culture is very different, the customs of people are very different. It could be that Sealand is not as economically developed, and thus the people and the citizens within Sealand do not have as much disposable income to spend on pizza or going out to restaurants to eat pizza. So it's very important when you are dealing with other countries that you have a good local awareness. Now, an example of that would be McDonald's. Now, McDonald's has a huge presence in India, but in no Indian McDonald's will you see a product containing beef, even though beef is one of the mainstays of every other McDonald's in your more developed nations such as the United States and in Europe. And that's because in India they value the cow as a sacred animal and therefore they don't eat beef. So that's an example of local awareness from an international organization. So with the background out the way, let's move on to the next section on the business model of Pizzatime. So we can see that in addition to this wide choice of pizzas, they also offer things such as dough balls, salads, desserts, and beverages. Now, this word here, complementary products, feeds into what I was speaking about in that first page on your role on pricing strategies, that perhaps they offer deals where you buy a pizza and you also buy dough balls and a salad along with it, and you get it for cheaper than buying all of it separately, all of it individually. It also gives us some indication about where their materials come from. Now obviously, if you've got lots of different pizzas, lots of different types of topping, lots of different other products such as salads and desserts, they may all come from various different suppliers. So that brings up issues with the logistics of getting all the various raw materials in from these different suppliers if they are indeed different, and also about the power of these suppliers. Now, if a particular supplier is very powerful, then they have high supplier power as per Porter's 5 forces analysis, and therefore that makes it a more risky industry to be in. Because if the supplier is very powerful, they may turn around and say you have to charge, you may have to pay a certain amount more for the products, and that will of course affect your profit margins. So on to dough, which of course is a very important part, or arguably the most important part of any pizza. And the dough is prepared at a central processing plant located in Ireland. So a single factory that creates all the dough and ships it out to all the various restaurants. Now, some of the ingredients for the dough are imported and others are available locally. Now, whenever you see the word imported when it comes to your supply chain, you always need to think about the risks that come from importing products. So factors that can affect importing are economical. So when you're looking at your PESTLE model, you're thinking about E for economics, and you're also thinking for P for political. Because if you are dealing with another country, you're also running the risk of being affected by that particular nation's politics. So if, for example, some sort of issue were to arise between the government of Ireland and the government of a country where ingredients for the dough are imported, there could be a trade embargo imposed between the two nations, and therefore you are losing your source of ingredients to make your dough. Now, a classic example of this would be Coca-Cola during the Nazi era of Nazi Germany, and how during that frictions between Germany and other nations such as the United States, where Coca-Cola was produced, meant that Coca-Cola was no longer able to sell Coca-Cola or to market Coca-Cola within Nazi Germany. And of course that's quite an extreme example, and we wouldn't necessarily expect anything of that magnitude to come up in the exam, but the point is that political differences between nations can affect businesses that operate between those two nations. And of course you have the economic factor of that as well, in that exchange rates will then play a part in the profitability of importing. If the value of your currency decreases against the value of the currency that of the country you are importing from, that will become more expensive for you to import. And likewise, if your currency increases in value against the currency of the country that you are importing from, then it becomes less attractive for them to import to you or them to export to you. So therefore, either way, you risk either the supply or the profitability of the ingredients that you import. This also raises an issue that if all the dough is being created in Ireland in this central processing plant, how does that affect transport out to the restaurants in Peeland and Sealand? In order for this to work, there would need to be a very effective transport management system. And we can see that the transportation of frozen dough is by Pizzatime's logistics unit. Now, one thing you could say about this is that they are not in the logistics business. They are not in the transportation and delivery business. They are in the pizza restaurant business. So it could be that there is an opportunity here for outsourcing their deliveries and their transportation. And at the moment, there's no information about whether their logistics team is good or not, but there are companies that specialize in this sort of thing and do it very well. In fact, lots of major organizations actually outsource their delivery because of this, because it's something that they are not adept in. It's not one of the core competencies of their business, and therefore it's something that is suitable to outsource, an outsourceable opportunity, which is also a key exam topic. You may be asked about the logistics and the strategic implications of outsourcing a certain part of the organization. And it goes on to talk about the importance of a good transportation system here, because the restaurant manager is responsible for placing an order for each week for the following week. So perhaps they have to rely that the delivery will arrive on time. They can only order a week's amount at a time. They perhaps only have storage room for a week's amount of product, and therefore they have to be sent on time. If a delay to transport causes them to be a day late, that may be an entire day where the restaurant cannot open, the restaurant cannot trade, which not only is going to cost you a day's worth of business, but all consumers that go to the restaurant that day and find out it's closed or find out they don't have certain things available might be put off from coming back in the future. So there's also a long-term impact of that. There's also a section here where it says that the restaurant managers are responsible for placing the order. So therefore the restaurant managers must have sufficient information to calculate how many they are going to need. So they would need an effective information system in place. And what I mean by an effective information system would be one that builds up a big picture, builds up a trend analysis, things like that, so they can accurately calculate how much they're going to need for each particular week. Because obviously there's going to be variations in different weeks. Now, for example, a week where all the children are off school, maybe they're more likely for people to come to that restaurant, for families to come to that restaurant, and therefore they'll perhaps need more dough that week than they would in a week when the children are all at school. So an example here of a bad information system would be one that only measures day-to-day quantities, doesn't build up trends, doesn't take into account wastage, doesn't take into account seasonal trends and seasonal variations, etc. And another thing here is that the dough needs to be thawed out for refrigerated storage for use each day. So this is a breaking down to a day-to-day level now, because obviously you can only thaw out the dough once. It cannot be refrozen, and if it's not used by the end of the day, it must be disposed of. So there's a wastage issue here. And likewise, if you do not thaw out enough, then you may end up, by the end of the day, not having enough bases left to offer pizza. So once the customer comes in and places an order, the bread or the dough is then kneaded into a pizza shape, toppings are added and baked. So the advantage of this is that you could possibly sell the pizza as handmade, freshly prepared there and then for the consumer. But it is also indicative of the process of the organization, or the process of creating the pizza by the organization. So each customer needs to be made by hand rather than perhaps going through an automated process. So there's a lot of manual labour required here, but it could perhaps be automated. Now, unlike the dough, the actual ingredients, so this could be for the pizza toppings or it could be for the desserts, as mentioned earlier, they are not sourced from a central site. They are sourced from local suppliers, which could be a potentially odd thing, given that if the restaurants are based all over the country, what qualifies as a local supplier? Is it a national supplier, or do they have a list for each particular restaurant with the local suppliers within that particular restaurant's particular area? But they must come from an approved supplier list by the head office. So you are relying then on particularly the franchised restaurants to use this approved supplier list, which can probably be negotiated as a term in the contract, in the franchising contract. Now, it's then also up to the head office to ensure that these approved suppliers continue to supply ingredients of the quality expected by Pizzatime. So when do the restaurants know to replace their toppings, to replace their other ingredients? Well, they have a predetermined optimal reorder point. So in theory, this should be the best possible time or most efficient in terms of cost and time, etc., to order new ingredients. Now, when it says predetermined, it could be that there's a blanket point for all restaurants, which perhaps is not the best thing, because each restaurant might do slightly better business or sell more of certain ingredients. For example, if you have a restaurant set up in an area where the number of vegans and vegetarians is more prevalent, then you'll perhaps have less people ordering meat pizzas and pizzas like that, and therefore the amount of meat ingredients that you need for your pizza toppings will be less. And this is all done by using the economic order quantity model, which of course is a great model to calculate a predetermined number to order to give you the best long-term cost overall. However, the disadvantage of using this model is that it doesn't take into account costs and issues relating to deliveries and delays in delivery, holding costs, and also the fact that the items are perishable, which it does go on to talk about here by using a first in, first out inventory model. But the actual economic order quantity model itself will not take those into account. Now, in addition to the dough, other supplies that are sourced centrally are packaging and equipment. Now, this extends to what I was talking about earlier about standardizing the business across all different restaurants. So they're all using the same equipment, all using the same processes as the result to make the pizzas, and other things like wearing the exact same uniforms, using the exact same packaging to package up leftovers that people can take home, etc. Which helps the central office to keep the brand the same and uniform across all restaurants, so that when you go into a Pizzatime in one part of the country, it's exactly the same as when you go into a Pizzatime in the other part of the country. And likewise, this is just delivered out with the weekly delivery of dough, which saves perhaps on delivery time, but also you have the issue there that perhaps the need for packaging and equipment is not always completely in sync with the need for dough. It could be that you end up with a storage of packaging and equipment if too much is being delivered, but you may also suddenly need some in the middle of the week when perhaps you've still got a few days till your weekly dough delivery comes in. So there's no opportunity to get that extra packaging and equipment outside of the usual dough delivery. Now, the final paragraph here talks about where they set up? What kinds of places do they look for so that they can ensure good footfall into their restaurants? And it says here that they rely on passing trade. So they're giving you some examples here, such as shopping malls, town centres, airport lounges and motorway service stations. So perhaps they are relying here on people spontaneously deciding to come and eat in Pizzatime rather than getting people to go out with the intention of eating at Pizzatime restaurants. Now obviously there are advantages and disadvantages to this. The advantages is that your presence in these areas in itself is a marketing tool for your restaurant. However, particularly with things like shopping malls and town centres, if the shops close at a certain time, then people aren't going to be at the shops and therefore they won't be walking past your restaurant and deciding to go in. Now, for example, if the shops are all shutting at 5 o'clock because people are going home, then are you going to get good business then? Because once they've got home, they're unlikely to come back out to go and get something to eat. Now, if the evenings are also the best time for restaurants, is the fact that you're placed in an area where there isn't going to be that many people in the evening the best place, especially if you're relying on people spontaneously deciding to come into your restaurant after walking past it. And this of course can be combated by having more visibility on media such as television and in magazines, where people are actually deciding to go out to go and visit a Pizzatime restaurant. And another thing that they do here is that you can have the pizza boxed and you can take it away with you. So there's a takeaway opportunity here, which they only see at the moment as being a tiny percentage of sales. But there is perhaps a lot of scope for growth there. Now, if you look at Domino's, Domino's is considered the biggest pizza company in the world. Domino's doesn't even have any restaurants. It is purely a takeaway and a home delivery business. So there is perhaps an opportunity here, a market development opportunity to bring new customers who perhaps aren't going out to shopping malls and town centres, to perhaps give them the opportunity to have Pizzatime pizza at home. Particularly with the growth in online shopping, the amount of people going to town centres and shopping malls is decreasing. So therefore Pizzatime needs to look at ways in which it can bring the Pizzatime brand and Pizzatime products to people who aren't always going to be passing the restaurants, who aren't going to form part of that passing trade that they currently go for. So going forward, that could be a key new business, new project opportunity of Pizzatime, which of course also feeds back into that project section we discussed on the first page of the pre-scene. You could be asked to project manage a move into home delivery, into takeaway products to an entirely new audience. So I hope you've enjoyed this sample video of the Astranti Management Pre-Scene Analysis video series. For more information on the full series and also on other products such as masterclasses and mock exams with marking and feedback, and other products all geared up to helping you pass your management case study exam, please visit the Astranti website on www.astranti.com. Thank you.